As you know, we just finished our meeting with the transition team. This was a very significant meeting. It was the very first outside meeting that the transition team has held, and rightfully so, they chose to hold it with veterans, and the American Legion has been very proud to host that meeting. We appreciate priorities and the focus of the transition team by making this their first stop in a critical transition process. We're encouraged that the incoming administration chose veterans. They did a great job of setting the tone for a very productive meeting. More than 30 organizations, veterans organizations, shared their policy priorities with 13 members of the President and Vice President-elect's transition and VA landing team. A great many important topics were discussed. Among them were enhancing, sustaining, and properly funding the 21st Century Department of Veteran Affairs, protections for veterans who must be contracted out for VA services, highlighted lack of comprehensive legislation regarding veterans out of the 114th Congress. Today's meeting was monumental. People talked about how important it is to have a healthy VA, how important it is to provide a veteran-centric VA for veterans and the programs that we create so that every veteran feels like they're getting the benefits that they've earned. Taking a holistic approach to making sure that the veterans and their families are taken care of. Talking about homelessness, eradicating homelessness, taking care of health care benefits, the compensation, education, making sure that we take care of families of the fallen and caregivers, women veterans, and all segments of those who've served and the families who supported them while they served. The American Legion's been very happy to host this meeting, and we think it's very important. I'm going to turn it over to Sherman Gillum, Executive Director of Paralyzed Veterans of America. Sherman?
Thank you, Verna. I'd like to start by paying tribute to the first American service member to die fighting the Islamic State in Syria, Senior Chief Petty Officer Scott Cooper Dayton, who died on Thanksgiving in northern Syria, while most of us were enjoying time with family under the shield of freedom that men like Senior Chief Petty Officer Dayton provides. For those service members who aren't killed in action but return with catastrophic injuries, such as permanent paralysis and polytrauma, lost limbs and brain injury, our country bears an obligation to restore their lives and identities to the greatest extent possible. It starts with access to quality specialized health care that is supported by tertiary support services like oncology, pulmonary surgery, and other disciplines that are necessary to collaboratively address the complex medical needs of these veterans. Over the past couple of years, in the wake of the Phoenix VA scandal, our Congress and the veteran community have wrestled with the question of how much of the care provided for veterans can be shifted to the private sector. For Paralyzed Veterans of America, the question is more complex than that, though. How do we expand private sector health care for the majority of veterans who need timely access to care without diminishing the access to and quality of specialized care for the most vulnerable veterans who rely on VA for lifelong care? The problem is not simply the fact that VA health care for severely disabled veterans is better. In fact, I've used TRICARE to access care from non-VA providers, and it was fine, which is why we don't outright oppose Veterans Choice Care. We're using the private sector to augment the capacity of VA care provision. The issue is the unanswered question of accountability. Right now, a veteran who accesses care through VA, whether VA provides it or authorizes access to a non-VA provider, is protected by Title 38 of the United States Code in a number of ways: medical malpractice remedies, clinical appeal rights, accredited representation at no cost, congressional oversight, and most importantly, accountability to the public. What I have yet to hear, however, is whether these same protections extend to veterans who opt for non-VA care through the Choice Act. And if they do not, have we fixed the problem or simply passed the buck? Some have recommended that VA retain its function as a provider of specialized services and outsource the rest. But it's not that simple for the reasons I mentioned earlier regarding the importance of maintaining tertiary support for specialized services. Standalone spinal cord injury and polytrauma units will do just that, stand alone. In a fragmented and less coordinated care environment, this is not optimal for veterans whose healthcare issues are often too complex and harder to treat for providers who do not specialize in the disciplines that are common in VA specialized services. Paralyzed Veterans of America prides itself on two aspects. One is speaking truth to power and being more interested in problem solving in problem lamenting, especially where specialized services are concerned. We maintain that the VA spinal cord injury system of care needs more bedside nurses and doctors to meet unmet demand, and we urge Congress to support VA with these additional resources. We also insist that if Veterans Health Administration updates and follows its own policies and directives more timely and consistently, accountability will be better assured, and we will see less unnecessary variability across the system. We arrived at these conclusions through our annual site visits to VA spinal cord injury centers, where our team of doctors, nurses, and architects see the problems firsthand and formally submit recommendations to improve care. To his credit, Secretary Bob McDonnell has set VA on a positive course with myriad improvements, and it is our desire to see that momentum continue under the next administration, starting with the focus on the staffing and policy issues that I mentioned earlier. Those thoughts in mind, Paralyzed Veterans of America looks forward to working with the Trump administration, VA, and our fellow veteran service organizations to ensure our most severely disabled veterans are not forgotten in any effort to improve access to and quality of care for all veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Next, we'll hear from Rick Wyman, Executive Director of Vietnam Veterans of America. Mr. Wyman?
Thank you, Verna. Many thanks to the American Legion and to Ms. Verna Jones for making their facility available and for hosting this event. This is an important first step that will keep the focus on veterans. Veterans are not a Republican problem and not a Democratic problem, and they're not an independent problem. They're an American problem to take care of. In a sense, problem is that where lessened, they need to be made as whole again as possible, and that includes the families. We're here with a united front of the veterans organizations as well as the family organizations to make sure that the message comes through loud and clear is keep the VA, but let's make it better. This day, tens of thousands of vets are going to get good to very good and oftentimes excellent care across the nation at VA hospitals. The problem is, as Sherman pointed out, is quality assurance, is to make sure that we weed out the folks who need to go away and find another way to contribute to the good of America. We feel that the uniting together is far and away the best way. The Legion values it enough to put it in their boardroom, and some years ago, actually 20 years ago, Vietnam Veterans of America gave an award to the American Legion for their extraordinary work in producing the Agent Orange tapes and hiring Mr. Dick Christian and the former executive director, John Summers, were absolutely essential to moving forward on that issue. And that's what we can do when we are together. And I assure you that the veteran service organizations and the military service organizations and allied advocates are together on keeping the VA, making it stronger, correcting it where it's need be, and giving the Secretary more authority and latitude when it comes to holding managers accountable, to include sending people down the road. Anyway, I thank you for your attention, and once again appreciate the transition team taking the time to come and spend this morning listening to all of us, to all the voices together. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And thank you all for being here. We are now open for any questions that you may have. So.
Did you get any response from the transition team about some of the concerns that you raised or some of the issues, or was it just a one-sided sort of voice?
So today was a listening session. The transition team graciously came in and listened to our concerns and to all the things that we wanted them to know about our priorities and moving forward.
So what are you hoping for next then, in terms of proof that they're going to act on these issues?
So, as a matter of fact, we're going to be meeting with the transition team, again, the big 6 congressionally chartered organizations next week. And we'll have more conversation with the transition team. As we left the room, the transition team, many members assured us that this is just the first bite of the apple, that we're going to meet again, and they look forward to doing that. We've been given a website that we can send our position papers to them, so we will email them the our priorities and papers to that email address so they can then answer us back. But we're very hopeful and confident that we're going to continue to have conversation with the transition team and get answers to the questions that we may have.
So the transition team say that they would give a response when you send in this transition or the position papers?
So they gave us the web address to do that, to send it in. And in some conversations prior to this meeting, we talked about the best way to get our information to them. So for me to can't quite recall their exact answer, but as I said, as we walked out of the room and as we were networking and talking when the meeting was over, many of them said they look forward to having more conversation with us about our priorities, about our issues, and about our concerns, and about working with us.
But they didn't say they would respond to the position papers?
I don't recall.
Okay.
Hi. So each of you has said in some manner that you've raised the issue of turning over some health care to private doctors, and this is a position advocated by Trump during the campaign and by Concerned Veterans for America, which is really has taken on a very influential role in the transition. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more specifically about this group's some of the positions they've taken, which is not only for, I mean, you guys address this, but private care, but also they wrote a very in-depth sort of policy blueprint that calls for prioritizing disabled veterans, in terms of sort of subsidies for health care. I mean, and a lot of this stuff would be fairly drastic in terms of changes to VA. And I'm wondering if you guys could talk about the influence of this group on Trump and his transition team. I mean, Darren Selnick is kind of running the VA part of it, and he's a very active senior advisor with the group. I know we'd all be interested in hearing about that.
So it doesn't matter who says that they want to change the way VA health care is how veterans are receiving the VA health care. What matters to us is that veterans have a healthy VA health care system. The American Legion opposes getting rid of VA health care, the VA health care system. Now, we'll be the first to admit that there are some issues that need to be fixed, and the American Legion stands ready to work in collaboration with the administration, with the VA, our community partners, and other VSOs to make sure that that happens. Veterans deserve a system that is set up for them, that understands veterans. One of the ladies who was there with Blind Veterans of America talked today about being able to go to one place. She is able to maneuver her way through the VA because that's where she's comfortable. That's what she's used to. And a lot of veterans are used to that. There's nothing like walking into a healthcare system, and as a veteran myself, understand that this is a system who understands us. Well, the VA has other programs like the fee-basis program. If they can't provide the services that are needed, then they can fee that out to community care, and we're absolutely in favor of that. But we are not in favor of getting rid of the VA healthcare system. That would be, for lack of a better word, a slap in the face of all of us who've served.
Right, but that is what they're advocating.
I hear you. I understand, and our position stays the same. We're going to support anyone, President-elect Trump, as we supported President Obama and any other administration that's come before then, and we'll continue to do that. That's what we do. We take care of veterans. But we believe the VA healthcare system needs to take care of veterans.
And maybe just to follow up on this is, what's the American Legion, VVA, and PVA's position on the Concerned Veterans for America roadmap, Concerned Veterans of America roadmap, and will there be opposition if that roadmap is something that the Trump transition team appears to be following?
We're well documented in our disagreement with privatization. To Darren and Concerned Veterans credit, we began meeting with them about a year and a half ago, and we presented them with the dilemma they'll face, one of them being the Title 38 protection that veterans currently enjoy, the other being the priority group 4 veterans who are not service-connected but catastrophically disabled. Where do they fit in? All I can say is until we're satisfied that that's been thought through, we have an obligation to resist it. And besides the fact that I myself, as a veteran who rely on VA for health care, for lifelong care, and prefer VA, and I represent a lot of voices, I think they'll have a harder time than they think to privatize a system, particularly when you acknowledge that the private sector has its own challenges. The Affordable Care Act bore some of that out. It's harder to get care, and there are wait lists already in the private sector. And the question I pose is Congress going to call in private sector CEOs to talk to them about the issues gaming the system? When that happens outside the system, who's going to take care of that? And so those are issues that we raised. We weren't satisfied with the answers. The thing is, though, we have to keep talking. We don't want to attack the individuals for having their views, but we definitely want to make sure that when you say you want to change something, you understand you're responsible for what you're putting in its place. In this case, we're waiting to see an appropriate answer to that question. And to answer your question directly, yes, we will oppose any effort to privatize the system.
Absolutely, same thing with the American Legion. I can't answer to what CVA's written. They're a small group who have opposing views. When you look at the American Legion, PVA, VVA, DA, VVFW, the big six congressionally chartered organizations, and we represent about 5.6 million members, we all say the same thing in AMVETS, right? We say that veterans deserve a healthy VA healthcare system, and we oppose privatization. So I can't speak to what CVA has written, and yeah.
I understand that, but the most high-profile veteran representative that Mr. Trump has been documented meeting with is Pete Hegseth, who used to be CEO of CVA, seen leaving Trump Tower holding the CVA roadmap for reforming the VA or
And
changing
as
the
a leading
VA.
candidate along with Jeff Miller for.
And I mean, I can't speak to whether or not he's a leading candidate, but he was there, almost a high-profile person. So maybe CVA may be minor, not in your words, and not a big six, but still that roadmap is something that has that it looks like has been discussed with Mr. Trump and could be the only thing that's been discussed at this point. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
The real problem is in privatization is twofold. Well, threefold. One, you ain't seen nothing yet if you send people out to the private sector. We're talking $150 billion a year. I don't see that lying around anywhere.
That's right.
That the deficit hawks are going to find on the Hill. So it's not going to happen because VA healthcare is in fact more efficient. Having said that, in addition to increasing accountability and quality assurance, you need more clinicians. I mean, we said that in the hearing, Senate hearing, that was the very last hearing that Secretary Shinseki testified at, and along with my colleagues from VFW and the American Legion and others. And what we said was really very simple. You don't have enough clinicians. You've got way too many clinical needs, chasing way too few clinicians, and that's what, and then they gave people unrealistic goals and held them to them, and that caused people to lie. It's never acceptable to lie. Certainly not in a hospital situation. That's how people die. And if you got a problem, you need to say, I got a problem, and have leadership that's receptive to sending in a tiger team or whatever they need to do in order to fix that local situation. But expanding the pie, if you will, of the number of clinicians available is one thing. And secondly, we don't have enough doctors in this country. And when no new medical schools are starting up. So from our point of view, the US UHS medical school that is in Bethesda needs to expand greatly, and you need to create other campuses, probably one in San Antonio, one in Chicago, and at least one on the West Coast, because only the federal government has the resources to start a new medical school, and we need it across the board. And if anybody's interested, I can talk to you about that later. The second thing is case management, and the feedback mechanism needs to be greatly tightened up on the choice program. But if you have everybody out in the private sector, who's going to coordinate that? What pharmacist is going to coordinate the medications on and on and on again? The private sector insurance, they figure their HMO and PPOs on the basis of 1 to 3 presentations in other words, things wrong with you, presenting to the physicians. With vets, it was 3 to 5, and now on the younger vets, it's 10 to 12. So think about that in terms of clinical needs, even with the number of doctors it needs to expand. So, and somebody needs to coordinate it, and that should be the VA. And thirdly is, what we keep saying is let BVA be VA. What branch did you serve in? Where did you serve? When did you serve and where? And use that in the diagnosis and treatment modalities. Nobody in the private sector knows about that. VA needs to help educate the medical colleges in that, because 70% of vets get their health care outside VA. So we all need to do a better job, and certainly VA is missing the boat on some of its functions. But if you eliminate it, where are you going to go?
So in this meeting, though, given that groups, the VSOs have very considerable differences, with the transition team on these key issues of care and who gives it and how do veterans get it. I mean, was there tension in the meeting? Not at all.
I question
No.
the assumption that there's differences between us and them. They were listening to us.
Okay.
You've seen them with certain documents, but you haven't seen other things, certainly. So we don't really know.
You don't really
They're
know.
forming their ideas.
So
And that's
how,
what today was
Thank
about.
you, yes.
how much of the meeting then was spent on this issue and voicing your joint feeling that VA shouldn't be dismantled and sending that message that there are concerns about some of these proposals out there?
So each organization had an opportunity to give their priorities and to talk a little bit about 3 minutes or so. And so everyone had different, things and different priorities that they wanted the transition team to know. Again, this is the first meeting, and so this is an opportunity for each organization to give them an overview of what's to come next. Let's meet again, let's talk some more, and certainly veterans' health care issues and a healthy VA was brought up by many of the organizations in attendance. So everyone had different priorities, and they had different ways of expressing that to the transition team.
I guess my question is, do you feel like the position that you've been talking about now was clearly communicated to the transition team, and they know that the VSOs as a group won't stand for privatization, dismantling of VA?
I think our position was clearly relayed to the transition team, absolutely. Sherman?
I agree with that.
Rick?
Absolutely. And it was absolutely united among the 31 groups represented.
And how much discussion was there about continuity at the VA once the new administration comes in, namely whether or not there should be retain the same leadership at the top of the VA for a little while? Should the secretary be swapped out immediately? Should somebody like the head of the VHA be swapped out? Was there any discussion about continuity and what you all would like to see?
So we didn't talk about who runs the VA. What we talked about was presenting a united front and supporting whomever is in leadership at the VA, and I think that was consistent across the 31, the over 30 organizations that was there.
And are your organizations this time happy with the direction that the VA has taken under Secretary McDonald, his leadership?
Some. They've missed the boat on toxic wounds and toxic exposures, big time. And so we're hoping that the next administration will take everything from burn pits to Agent Orange much more seriously.
And this problem wasn't created overnight, and so the expectation wasn't that in 2 years you were going to fix everything that's wrong with this big enterprise. Speaking of continuity, I think the concern was more about keeping the momentum of the things that are going well. The MyVA experience is big because it puts the focus on the veteran, and we want to see that continue. I don't think that'll change. I think that whoever takes over will carry that forward. But those are the types of things we want to make sure are well understood by folks.
Church bells.
Well understood by folks who never have set foot in the VA or don't meet a lot of people who use the VA. So I think that's our role in this for whoever is in charge in the next year or so.
Whenever Sherman speaks, we have church bells going all around town. I just want to say one thing about your question, and this is, I can only speak for VVA. we have thoughts about a lot of people over there, but they certainly should keep some people at least for some time. One is Dr. Shulkin, who comes out of private sector, an extraordinary leader and physician. And one of the reasons he's so good is that he sees patients every Friday. Every Friday. Keeps you fresh. And all, from our point of view, all clinicians who work in the central office or in the visit offices or any place else, everybody should go face to face with veterans once a week. And same thing on the benefits side. So that's something I hope that they accentuate and do. And I'll leave it at that.
All right. Are there any more questions?
Have you all had any ongoing conversations with Kathy McMorris Rogers' office? When I've spoken to her office, she said that they've been continuing to work with the VSOs to change the draft legislation that she's put out, and that it seems like that could get new life in the next administration, something that CVA has endorsed.
So for the American Legion, I'm going to defer that question to our Legislative Director, Lou Celli. Lou, if you could please.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. We worked very closely with Representative McMorris Rogers when she first drafted and floated, if you will, that draft legislation, because she never really dropped it. It really was a conversation starter, and a conversation it did start. And it was not a conversation that we were happy to have, but it's a conversation that we knew that we needed to have. And going into the 115th Congress, we're absolutely confident that lawmakers are going to understand that VA, dollar for dollar, as my colleague Rick has said, is the best value on the planet. And now that we have a businessman who is going to be taking the helm of the country, we're counting on that business acumen to see just that. That dollar for dollar, the investment needs to be in the infrastructure of VA to ensure that our money is well spent and that our veterans are well taken care of.
So you're saying the VA should be run like a business?
I'm saying that the VA needs to be invested in so that the infrastructure is built to the degree that it can handle capacity.
And it's worth noting that, customer service, it's a business concept, but it certainly applies in this case where, we give the VA its value. And if we're dissatisfied, we're not going to patronize the business in a sense. So there are things that Secretary McDonald has brought to the challenge, and as Lou said, we hope the same is reflected in the White House with Mr. Trump's business acumen.
And more closely to your question, government is not a business. Businesses run at a for-profit level, governments do not. So a government is by its very nature a deficit running entity, and we just need to make sure that the money is well spent and the people's money is well taken care of, and we have to be good stewards of that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming. This truly has been a very important meeting. We look forward to more conversation with the transition team and want to assure you that the American Legion, along with the other veteran service organizations, stand by to help this administration make sure that we take care of our precious resources, and that's our nation's heroes, our veterans. Thank you for coming, and God bless you all.